So when you feel you're ready, you can open your eyes and we can start. Last time we stopped the presentation. We talked about the Colosseum and then we were about to talk about gladiators. So we'll start from there. So gladiators was an armed combatant who entertained the audience in Rome in these very violent confrontations, either with other gladiators or with wild animals or condemned criminals. The word gladiator comes from Latin gladiator and from the word especially gladius, which was the short sword that the gladiators used for fights. The origin of the gladiator is still an open debate. Some believe that they come from the Etruscan traditions. Other believes that they had origin in the south of Italy, in the region of Campania, because there's a fresco in Paestum, which is close to Pompeii, that shows pair fighters with helmets and shields. Gladiators, they were trained very hard, in a very hard way. They were trained like soldiers to use the sword and the shield, and they were trained in special facilities. When the Colosseum was built, one of these facilities was built right next to it. And as you can imagine, the training was everything for the gladiators. Part of the training was also the diet. And I was also surprised in finding out that gladiators were mostly vegetarian. So their proteins came mostly from beans, and then carbs were coming from barley, and then they were eating mostly vegetables. The gladiators usually wear a helmet. These helmets were all different and unique. Usually these helmets represent enemies that the Romans conquer, but the gladiators didn't wear an armor, and that's because to ensure the show. One fun curiosity is that, of course, when gladiator won several fights in a row, they became these celebrities in Rome. They were like Rome rock stars, to the point that the gladiators' sweat was sold outside the Colosseum in small bottle as an aphrodisiac. So this is an interesting fact to know. Those are two special tourists. Those are my son when we went to Rome a couple of years ago, maybe even 3 or 4, just outside the Colosseum. Now we're gonna visit together the catacombs. Catacombs are ancient underground burial places. There are around Rome. The word comes from Latin CATACOMBS, that means among the tombs. The Etruscans, remember the Etruscans were the ancient population in Tuscany and part of Lazio as well, used to bury their dead in excavated chambers in the ground. In contrast, the Roman custom had been cremation of the body. But then when with Christianity, burials had overtaken cremation as the usual practice. And both Christians and Jews prefer burial due to the idea of preserving the body. Beginning in the 2nd century AD, Roman law forbade burial places within city limits. And this is why the catacombs are located outside the city wall, mostly to prevent the spread of diseases. Catacombs were carved in this volcanic rock that is called tufa, and they extend for over 500 miles underground. By the end of the 6th century, there were over 60 Christian and Jewish catacombs in Rome. The actual tunnels date back to before the Romans, because the Etruscans used to use these tunnels for mining rocks. And the Romans used the tunnels for rocks as well, but then later Christian and Jewish used them as a mass grave. There is a whole world of art inside the catacombs. The cubicola, the rooms, are embellished with frescoes and marble floors. Among the paintings, many are inspired by stories from the Old and New Testament. And all these paintings are important not for their form, because they're really simple. They only have few details. There's no sense of space, but they're very important for the meaning. And they're important because they tell us what was dear to the first Christians. So the main themes, for instance, are the Good Shepherd with Jesus holding a sheep over his shoulders, or the story of Jonah thrown into the sea, or the raising of Lazarus to represent the power of God and the resurrection. Another recurring theme is definitely jobs that the dead were doing during their lives. So let's watch a short video together about the catacombs. And now we are traveling in the heart of Vatican City. We're going to see together the Basilica di San Pietro, St. Peter's Basilica, which is a Catholic church built in Renaissance style that is located in Vatican City in Rome, and is still the largest church in the world. It has a capacity of about 60,000 people. And if you've been there, you probably remember the overwhelming feeling of entering the church and see how big the church is inside. Catholic tradition holds that the Basilica is the burial site of St. Peter, that at one point became the leader of the apostles and the first bishop of Rome. Because of St. Peter's, the church is a famous place of pilgrimage from everywhere in the world, and the church is one of the major basilica with a holy door that gets open only during the Jubilee. The church, as we know, was built directly in the site where St. Peter was killed. So Peter traveled to Rome. He was killed under the Christian persecution that was started by Emperor Nero after the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. Peter was crucified head downwards by his own request, because he considered himself unworthy to die the same way as Jesus. The crucifixion took place near an Egyptian obelisk in the circle of Nero, and now the obelisk is the one that is in the center of the St. Peter's Square. According to tradition, Peter's remains were buried just outside the circus, and a shrine was built on the site to protect the tomb. Later in 4th century, the old St. Peter's Basilica was begun in this site. But by the end of the 15th century, the old basilica had fallen into disrepair, and Pope Nicholas V commissioned work on the building. But it was really under Pope Julio II that the church had its biggest transformation. So the Pope decided to demolish the ancient building and to replace it with a monumental structure that was supposed to house his tomb that Michelangelo was working on. The present building is the result of combined effort of several popes after Julio II for a period of over 100 years. A curiosity is that funds to build this monumental church were also coming from the granting of indulgences in return for contribution. An indulgence is basically a way to reduce the amount of punishment if you had undergo for sin. The architecture of the church is very complex, and it was changed during the centuries. Julio II organized a competition for the design of this huge building. The competition was won by Donato Bramante, and the first stone of the foundation was laid in 1506. The initial project, as you can see from the picture on your left, was a brick cross with a dome that was inspired by the one in the Pantheon that we saw together. Bramante's dome was to be surmounted by a lantern, very similar to the one that Michelozzo designed for Santa Maria del Fiore in Firenze. After Pope Giulio II died in 1514, Raffaello was confirmed as the first architect for the building, and he changed the plan, introducing a nave with 5 bays and rows of chapels. That is the second picture that you see in the slide. After Raffaello died in 1520, he was replaced by 2 architects, Baldassare Peruzzi first, and then Antonio da Sangallo the Younger later. And again, the plan for the church changed. And in 1547, finally, Michelangelo was appointed superintendent of the church. He mostly worked on the dome, but he made a few changes in the plan of the church as well. And he basically reversed the plan to a Greek cross as it was in the original plan by Bramante. But as I mentioned, Michelangelo worked mostly on the dome. The dome is huge, is the tallest dome in the world with a height of 448 feet and a diameter of 136 feet. So as I mentioned, Bramante's plan for the dome followed the one of the Pantheon very closely. The difference is that in Bramante's plan, there's windows, and as we saw in the Pantheon, there's no windows in the dome. So Michelangelo started from Bramante's design, but then he decided to follow the one of Brunelleschi that Brunelleschi used for Santa Maria del Fiore in Florence. And in fact, in Michelangelo's project, we have 2 shells of bricks, and that's the main change that Michelangelo introduced. When he died in 1564, he left a few drawings and also a large wooden model. And for his work, Michelangelo didn't want any money at this point. He was only looking for the salvation of his soul and for the glory of God. So he didn't ask any money for this commission. The dome was completely later, after Michelangelo's death in 1590 by Giacomo della Porta and Domenico Fontana. During the 18th century, a few cracks appear inside the dome, and there was a major restoration intervention where 4 iron chains were installed between the 2 shells to bind it. Speaking of still the architecture of the church, we're going to see together the facade, who was designed by architect Maderno at the end of the 16th century. It is built in travertine stone with a giant order of Corinthian columns. And at the very top, we see the statue of Jesus in the center and the 12 apostles. It is often said that the facade is the least satisfactory part of the design. This is the fact is because the Pope wanted to finish the building pretty quickly. Behind the facade, there is a portico with 5 portals. The central portal has a bronze door, and there's 9 windows, 3 of these windows with balcony, and the center one is the one from it which the Pope gives the blessing Urbi et Orbi to the city and to the world. There's a curiosity about the Holy Door. As I mentioned before, the Holy Door is a special door that is present in all the major basilica in the world, and is normally sealed, and it gets open only during the Jubilee and closed right after. This tradition was started by Bonifacio VIII in the 13th century, in the year 13 actually. So we cannot speak about St. Peter without taking a look at the square. St. Peter's Square is the large piazza that is directly in front of St. Peter's Basilica. There's the Egyptian obelisk is in the center of the piazza, and it was erected there in 1586, and it's believed to be the obelisk that witnesses the crucifixion of St. Peter, so it's very symbolic. This square was designed at the end of the 17th century by Gian Lorenzo Bernini. Bernini was already working on the interior of the church when he was commissioned to design the square. The colossal Doric colonnades is 4 columns deep, so it's really big. And it basically framed the whole basilica with the piazza itself. And as Bernini said, it looks like those are the maternal arms of the church, like embracing everybody who goes to see this church and pray inside the basilica. The paving, it was also very interesting. The paving has radiating lines that goes from the obelisk to the colonnades, and they're built in travertine stone. A curiosity about the square is that, so the square is in Vatican City, but according to the Lateran Treaty, the area of St. Peter's Square is subject to the authority of the Italian police for crowd control, even though it's a part of a separate state, which is Vatican State. The best way to access the piazza is definitely through Via della Costituzione. So if you start walking from Castel Sant'Angelo, which you can see in the picture in your left, next to the river, and you do Via della Costituzione, you have this stunning view of the piazza first and of the Basilica later. But let's go inside. As I mentioned, there's definitely an overwhelming feeling when you go inside because of the size and the beauty of this church. One of the main artwork inside the Basilica is definitely the Baldacchino by Gian Lorenzo Bernini, who, as I mentioned, is the same architect as the square. The Baldacchino was built in between 1623 and 1634 by Bernini under Pope Urban VIII. And it is the marking side of St. Peter's tomb. The tomb is underneath, and above the baldachin you have the beautiful dome by Michelangelo. The baldachin is built in Baroque style in bronze. Probably this is the same bronze that was stripped from the Pantheon during the Middle Ages. The baldachin is really big. The columns are about 66 feet tall. Bernini used over 6,000 kilograms of bronze to realize this big sculpture. And the columns that are adorned with sprigs of olives and bay, and the spiral shape suggesting an upward movement towards the angels that are on top of the baldachin, and the orb as a triumph of the church in the world. Another beautiful masterpiece inside is definitely the Pieta by Michelangelo. In Christian art, a Pieta is any portrayal, particularly sculpture of the Virgin Mary holding the body of her son Jesus. The Pieta was commissioned in 1497 by Cardinal Jean de Villers-Lalougrat, who asked Michelangelo to create this large-scale Pieta for his tomb. Michelangelo started to work the year after using a single piece of marble from Carrara in Tuscany. Remember, Michelangelo was only 21 years old when he realized this beautiful sculpture. The sculpture was completed in 1499, and it was put first in the chapel of Santa Petronella, which was the chapel where the cardinal was buried. Vasari described the Pietà, saying, it is certainly a miracle that a formless block of stone could ever have been reduced to a perfection that nature is scarcely able to create in the flesh. Remember that Vasari was a huge fan of Michelangelo. La Pietà is the only work signed by Michelangelo. According to Vasari, Michelangelo overheard a conversation where the statue was a tribute to another artist. And so the same night, he decided to go back to the chapel and to sculpt in the belt that the Virgin Mary is wearing, the words Michelangelo Buonarroti, Florentine, made this. For this work, Michelangelo earned 450 ducati, which is the money at the time in Rome, which correspond to about 50,000 euro. Unfortunately, in the year 1972, May 1st, 1972, a tourist, this man called Laszlo Tooth, he was a geologist with, unfortunately, mental illness. He went inside the church holding geologist tools, and he severely damaged the Pietà, hitting with the hammer the head of Mary and then the hand as well. And this is the reason why, if you go see the Pietà today, it is protected by a special glass case. But let's see together why this work is so special.
Your redemption.
There is a kind of rhythm that points to that hand. The drape and the knee point up towards Christ's knees, which in turn create a kind of rhythmic bridge to her hand and to that sense of wondering. This is very clearly an image that's meant to be contemplated, and the pain and the suffering that Christ has endured,
and Mary's enduring.
That Mary is enduring is meant to be contemplated as a pathway.
They're polishing the floor.
Okay, let's move on.
So Michelangelo is definitely one of the main protagonists in Rome in this time. Even though Michelangelo called Firenze always his home, it is in Rome that he created his most important masterpiece. He arrived for the first time in Rome in June 1496 at the age of 21. And he started to work on a commission for Cardinal Riario. It was a statue of Bacchus, the Roman god of wine. This statue was rejected by the cardinal because Michelangelo chose to sculpt a drunken Baccho. So the cardinal thought it was not appropriate, and he rejected. In November 1497, Jean de Villers-Lagula, as we mentioned, commissioned Michelangelo La Pietà. Michelangelo was only 24 at the time of the completion of the statue. And after a brief time in Florence between 1499 and 1505, Michelangelo came back to Rome, invited this time by the newly Pope Julius II. And the first commission for Michelangelo was a huge commission. It was to build the Pope's tomb. And it's going to take more than 40 years for Michelangelo to finish this project. During the same period, Michelangelo painted, still under commission of Julio II, the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, which took 4 years to complete. There's a funny story behind the commission of the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Bramante, who was the architect working on St. Peter's, was really jealous that the Pope commissioned Michelangelo with this tomb, that he suggested Julius II to name Michelangelo to create the painting in the Sistine Chapel, because he was convinced that Michelangelo was not familiar with painting in general and with fresco in particular. So definitely Bramante was Michelangelo definitely proved Bramante wrong, realizing the beautiful ceiling in the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo persuaded Julius II to give him complete freedom in the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. He decided to do scenes from the creation of man, the falling of man, and then prophet and the genealogy of Christ. But what was happening in Rome when Michelangelo was there? Several archaeological sites were open. And in 1506, the statue of Laocoon was discovered underground with other many relics from the ancient Rome. The statue was discovered in the ancient baths of Titus, and Michelangelo was asked to accompany Giuliano da San Gallo to inspect the statue and hopefully add the statue to Giulio II collection. The Pope was a major collector of ancient Roman and Greek art. From the moment on, from the moment when Michelangelo saw the statue of the Laocoon, he used it as a source of inspiration and for developing his own art. And the thing that he admired the most in the statue, it was the realism of the anatomy that you can see in the picture in the slide, and also the emotions coming literally through the stone. So as I mentioned, we're going to take a look at the Sistine Chapel. Of course, it's not possible to do a very in-depth conversation about it. It will require like a couple of hours to go through every single painting and frescoes, but I'm going to give you an introduction. The Sistine Chapel is a large chapel that was built between 1477 and 1480 by Pope Sixtus IV, therefore Sistine Chapel. The chapel is still the local for the papal conclaves, which is the College of Cardinals that elect the new Pope. During Sixtus IV, the side walls of the chapel were painted by masters like Botticelli, Ghirlandaio, and many others. But it was really the encounter between Michelangelo and the visionary Pope Giulio II that create the Sistine Chapel that we see today. The ceiling of the chapel is 62 feet high. Michelangelo started to work in 1508, and he was working several hours per day in a very uncomfortable position with a skeleton crew. And we think that he even built the scaffolding system by himself. Remember how Michelangelo was really jealous of his work. He was never satisfied. And that's why he had this skeleton crew. And he also wanted to build the scaffolding by himself. Fun fact is that Michelangelo even wrote a poem, a short poem, to describe the impossible conditions under which he was working. And at one point in the poem, he said something like, with the beer toward the sky and with the brush over my face. Let's see, a close out. So Michelangelo finished the ceiling in 1512, and it was revealed to the public on October 31st, 1512. And from Vasari, we know that the spectators were completely silent and speechless looking at the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. So Michelangelo decided to divide the main scene in 9 stories. 3 from the creation of the war, 3 from the creation of man, and then 3 scenes from Noah's life. This is probably the most iconic. Everybody knows this image is the creation of Adam. God is depicted as an elderly man, a bearded man. Adam is on the lower left and is naked. and God's arm is completely stretched toward Adam's hand, but the fingers don't touch. And you can definitely see that between these two fingers, there's all the power, the whole universe is there. Other scenes from the ceiling are the creation of Eve, which is in the center of the vault. And this is the first scene in which God appears, and Eve is emerging from Adam's body while Adam is sleeping. Then there's scenes from Noah's, from the flood and from Noah's Ark. And then the last one on the top, on the bottom that you see is the drunken Noah. Noah is asleep and is mocked by his sons. The traditions says that Noah invented the wine. And here Michelangelo wants to show us the weakness of man and the struggling to become a more spiritual being. Michelangelo came back to work in the Sistine Chapel later, between 1536 and 1541, when he realized the fresco covering the whole altar wall with the Last Judgment. Michelangelo was much older. He was 67 years old when he realized the Last Judgment. At the center of the work, we see Christ looking down. I'm going to show you a close up. So this is a beardless Christ, very young, and Michelangelo got inspired by the Belvedere Apollo, which was in the collection of Julio II. To the left of Christ, there's Mary looking down, the saved. Surrounding Christ are a large number of figures. We have saints and prophets. We have John the Baptist. We have St. Peter that you see in the picture on your right, holding the key of heaven. And there's an interesting one, which is San Bartolomeo, that he's literally holding his skin. Many art critics say that the face on the skin is actually Michelangelo's self-portrait, and this is because Michelangelo was criticized many times for his art, and he felt that he was sometimes skinned alive. Down the dam, there's a terrible scene of a hell. The souls are sent down to Minos, who's like the god of hell in this painting, who's wrapped by this serpent. And the face of Minos seems to be the one of Pier Luigi Farnese, who was a man, a noble from the Farnese family, who was known at the time of Michelangelo for to be a very violent man. And Michelangelo thought about like punishing him, giving him the face of Minos. The Last Judgment became very controversial as soon as it was seen from everybody. Michelangelo was accused to be insensitive to decorum, in respect of nudity, and also close to paganism. After Michelangelo died in 1564, an Italian artist and mannerist painter, Daniele da Volterra, covered the majority of the nudes with breeches. And because of that, he was called the breeches maker, which is in Italian is braghettone. Here you can see a few samples that Daniele da Volterra did. Luckily, his intervention was really light. He slightly changed what Michelangelo did. But in the Santa Caterina scene, he painted over the body of Santa Caterina, who now is clothed, and the man behind her, he changed completely the composition of the painting. Now I want to show you an interesting video, which is a behind the scene of the Sistine Chapel, on how the big restoration in the 90s affected the chapel itself, and how today they're maintaining the chapel with humidity and temperature to ensure that the chapel will still be there for many years to come. And the Trevi fountain, it's definitely one of the main sites in Rome. It is considered a late Baroque masterpiece. It was designed first, commissioned first to Gian Lorenzo Bernini by Pope Urban VIII. But then it was really designed later in 1732 by Nicola Salvi and then completed by Giuseppe Pannini. The origin of the fountain go back to the year 19 BC, in which period the fountain was basically the end of an aqueduct coming inside the city that was known as the Aqua Virgo. The name Trevi comes from the Italian tre vie or Latin trivio, which means three ways, since the fountain was the meeting point of three different streets. The background for the fountain is Palazzo Poli, with the facade designed by Vanvitelli in the 18th century. In the center, we have the statue of Oceanus by Pietro Bacci. Oceanus was a Titan, son of Uranus and Gaia, and father of the rivers. He is inside this kind of carriage with marine horses and tritons, I'm sorry, and one of the horses calm, the other one is very agitated to symbolize the ocean, the double nature of the ocean. And then behind the two statues on the sides are a statue of health, and the other one is the statue of abundance by Filippo della Valle. The Trevi fountains stands a massive 85 feet tall and 65 feet wide, and spills about 2.8 million cubic feet of water every day, but the water is all recycled water. According to the legend, if you toss a coin into the fountain, so you have to give your back to the fountain, you use your right hand over your left shoulders. So if you toss one coin, you will return to Rome. If you toss two coins, you return to Rome and you'll fall in love. And if you toss three, you'll return to Rome, fall in love, and marry. At the end of every year, almost $1.7 million are collected from the fountain, which is pretty impressive. And these monies are usually donated to the Caritas, which is a charity association in Italy. Of course, it's illegal to fish coins from the fountain. Back in the days, there was a thief in Rome that was known with the name of D'Artagnan. He stole coins from the fountains for like 34 years until he was caught from the Italian police in 2002. The fountain was restored in the 90s with funds from the Italian fashion house Fendi that invested millions of dollars in the project. The fountain, as you know, appears in several movies. Probably the most famous one is La Dolce Vita by Fellini, where Anita Ekberg and Marcello Mastroianni get inside the fountains with their clothes on, and it's a beautiful scene that I would love to show you. When Marcello Mastroianni died in 1996, the fountains was turned off, and this is something that never happens, and it was draped in black to honor him. So I would like to show you a brief scene from La Dolce Vita by Fellini, and I encourage you also to notice the cat that is in this scene and how Marcello is feeding him with some milk. And those are my son at the Trevi fountain when we were in Rome. Now I want to leave you with some curiosities. Romans had street food and shopping malls. Rome is the only city with another state in it, the Vatican City. In Rome, there's over 2,000 drinking fountains. They're called nasone, which means big nose, from the shape that you can see in the picture in the slide. And there's also an app that you can download when you're in Rome that is going to tell you where you can find fresh water. There's over 280 fountains and more than 900 churches. The mouth of truth is a lie detector. So the legends say that this is an old ancient mask. That it was probably from a fountain or from a manhole representing the river Tiber, but now it's in the portico of a church. So the legend says that if you put your hand inside the mouth and your line, he's going to bite you, actually. Rome First University, La Sapienza, was founded in 1303 and is the largest in Europe. In Rome, there's a museum for pasta, entirely dedicated to pasta. And the average Italian eats 20 kilograms of pasta each year. The ancient Rome was more populated than modern New York. And I ask you to take a look at the cat in the video, in the Fellini movie, because Roman cats love ruins. I want to leave you with this video. I'm going to cut the video because there's no time, but this is a very sweet video. So I'm going to stop the video right here. And because our time is almost over, this is where you can eat in Rome. Pasta, of course, is the main protagonist, with la carbonara, gricia, cacio, and pepe. And then you can eat also a kind of arancino, which is called suppli. And as a dessert, there's this grattacheche, which is basically flavor iced. And I'm going to leave you with what we say in Italy, especially in Rome, when you do something and not in a proper way or the way you should do. We say è come andare a Roma e non vedere il Papa, which means it's like going to Rome and don't see the Pope. So I'm going to leave, we have a couple of minutes for questions. If you have any, I would love to hear from you. No questions?
That was amazing. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
You know, I stayed in the Piedmont area of Italy, and it was like a medieval area, and there were cats all over.
Yeah.
And I was just thrilled. You know, I'm a cat person.
Yes.
But, it was lovely.
Isn't it interesting that there's this foundation that takes care of these ruined cats?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've been to Rome several times, and I have a very good friend that I very often travel with. She has adopted by distance several cats from Torre, Argentina. I've been there at least 3 times. It really is a remarkable place. I'm a dog person, but it's a great cat sanctuary.
Yeah, it really is. It's sweet.
Yeah.
Greece has a lot of cats as well,
Yeah.
all over.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting how in the Fellini movie, Mastroianni is feeding one of these stray cats too, right?
I just saw 3 coins in the fountain the other day because I've been looking for it. It's finally free.
Yes. So if you toss 3, you'll go back to Rome, you'll fall in love, and you'll get married. So that's perfect, right?
It is.
Thank you. We cannot wait for Italy to open up so we can go and visit.
Oh, great. I hope you all come back in the winter, and I wish you the best. And thank you so much. You were amazing. I love to do this class with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Thank you. Take care.
Your
Yeah.
boys are adorable.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Benedict.
you.
Bye-bye. Take
Bye.
care.
Benedetta.